All right. Hi, I'm Bailey Fessler. I'm the director of RevOps at Exactly. Wanted to welcome everybody to our spring cleaning tool consolidation conversation. We have an awesome panel for this conversation. I'm going to ask everybody to go around and introduce themselves, and to keep things interesting, I would love to know what everyone's favorite dessert is. So, Brad, if you could kick us off.
Oh man, you got to put me up first. I can't think
You're
of my
next. Alphabetically.
That's fair. No, I really appreciate it, Bailey. Great to be here. Thank you for having me. For those I haven't met, I'm Brad Smith, one of the co-founders here at Sonar. Man, favorite dessert. It's hard to beat just a really good old-fashioned chocolate chip cookie. Nothing too complex, a handful of ingredients, but it has to be warm. It can't be cold. If it's cold or even like room temp, it's a game changer. So it has to absolutely be warm. Um,
I love that.
I know we were catching up earlier. A little bit about myself too. Like I said, co-founder of Sonar. Prior to starting this business, man, it's been about 15 years in RevOps. I think that was well before the RevOps term was even a RevOps term. So marketing ops, sales ops, business operations were a bunch of previous titles. But currently, like I said, co-founder of about a 30-person company. But prior to that, worked all the way from other startups to Fortune 500s.
Awesome. Excited to pick your brain on this, Brad. Christine, over to you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Christine Maxey. I am the VP of Revenue Operations at Lean Data. I have also been in RevOps for about 15 years. So from spreadsheets to the proliferation where we are today of tech and data at our fingertips. Our company size right now is about 160 people, but I too have worked at larger corporations from EMC down to the fifth person at a startup. So seen it across RevOps across the gamut. My favorite dessert. Okay, I don't like this question because I don't want to pick. Probably bread pudding. I like the hot cold.
That is an excellent choice.
Yeah.
That's a good one. Haley.
Hi, everyone. My name is Haley Katzman. I'm currently the Vice President of Global Strategic Accounts at HighSpot. And for the past 5 years, I led our revenue operations, analytics, and enablement team. I've been at HighSpot for almost 10 years, so have seen the company from when I started, below 20 employees all the way up to what we are today, over 1,000, and have led our operations team through those different phases of growth. So really excited for the conversation today. Favorite dessert? I love a key lime pie. It's probably my favorite dessert, both to make and to eat.
That's amazing. I'm gonna have to get dessert after we do. All right, and last but certainly not least, the first VP of Ops I had the pleasure of working for, Jeff Serlin.
Thank you, Bailey. I've been doing RevOps, sales ops for 20 plus years. Brad, you mentioned before it was RevOps. I was doing it before it was even sales ops. I had different roles, but always was, we need a pipeline. We should manage Salesforce, kind of doing those things in the background. Most notably, I ran the teams at Marketo, Intercom, Pendo. Those were all over 1,000 people. Marketo was public when I was still working there. I recently started up as co-founder of a company called Revcast, really solving problems that we in RevOps have of getting out of spreadsheets to do better planning, create a better plan, and better manage and get insights against that plan. So smallest company I ever worked at, we're 10 folks now, but it's really exciting to be doing something different and building for myself and for my colleagues. My favorite dessert. Bailey and I did work together, and I had a rule that at least once a month we had to find a reason to bring in cupcakes from an awesome place in San Mateo, which many of you listening probably know. I liked almost all of them, but it was the chocolate ones with the chocolate buttercream, the cream cheese filling were by far my favorite. So when it was my birthday, they got me a really, really big one that you shouldn't eat all at once, but I did. So chocolate and cupcakes are probably my two favorite desserts.
Amazing. Yeah, I live really close to dangerously close to a crumble cookies. So I see that in my future at some point today. So getting into it, I think it's been a topic on a couple of the MSP panels I've participated in over the last couple of years of, how do you run efficiently as RevOps? And part of that becomes how does your tech stack look, and can we consolidate? And I know that's currently a lot of pressure I'm getting from my senior staff and organization. So really looking forward to all of your insights. But Christine, maybe we can start with you. What is some of the criteria that you use, like to determine if something should be there or if something maybe could be replaced by something else?
Well, to be honest, everything is under consideration at this point because there are so many options. But the way I organize my thoughts and my team's thoughts around this is to first think about prioritization. Like, what do we have to have? What is nice to have? And what is no longer needed? It is hard to let go. It's hard to let go when the product has done the thing it needs to do, but it's no longer a need. It's hard to let go when you've built relationships at that vendor and partnerships. But sometimes you have to make that decision. And it doesn't mean it won't be you won't be able to bring that partner back either at a different time or a different company, but letting go sometimes is hard. So have to have, like business critical, nice to have, no longer needed. And in the nice to have, there's a lot of play there because there are a lot of nice to haves. Business critical is a little harder to make the shift. And then I look at consolidation. So prioritization, consolidation. And consolidation for me is not just about across the tech stack, it's across the teams. So sometimes I notice teams are using things that overlap, and that's a little easier than consolidation of tech. It's consolidation across the teams. So I looked at both of those.
It's almost consolidation of like processes or.
Yeah, like we had 2 sales enablement platforms. We just didn't need to. They came out of different needs, but those needs had kind of come together after a few years. Plus, it's like one less piece of tech I have to integrate, one less data source, because that's a big deal, and one less tech troubleshooting implementation kind of piece for me. So sometimes it's just across teams. It's not necessarily across the tech vendors. And then optimization. This is kind of the hardest one. Do we have the best tools for the job? How do we leave room for new vendors? And how do we even know about new vendors? There's a lot. And I take calls because I want to learn, but I can't take them all. And so I rely on you guys and webinars like this and Slack channels to me look at the new shiny thing to say, what do I need to know? Even if I don't need it now, I like to know what's out there. So I kind of break it into what I say: prioritization, consolidation, optimization.
I like that. That's a good one. Haley, I saw you nodding. Is that kind of similar to your process?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of similarities between the, must have, need to have, and the nice to have. I think, for me, one of the things that I really like to look at is what are the key metrics that we're trying to drive with the tool from a prioritization process. And so, when I look at the funnel, there's really a couple of key metrics that will change or transform our revenue model. So usually, like, if we're driving kind of the overall revenue model process, I mean, you can impact pipeline, win rate, ASP, velocity, net retention, right? Those are the key metrics that you can really move the needle on. And so when we step back to kind of look at the overall tools, I mean, I think any tool can kind of try and attach to one of those metrics, but what we really want to look at in our business is which of those are actually moving the needle as it relates to those key metrics. And one of the things that has to be there first and foremost is a high level of adoption. And that sounds super obvious and super simple, but I think it's something that's really overlooked at because a lot of people will, say, we need this tool, or we love this tool, or it solves this particular use case. But yes, is it being used in your business that way? And is it actually being adopted to drive the outcomes that you're looking to drive? And if not, then it might be a perceived must-have. But is that really how you're using it internally? And are those the outcomes that it's driving for the business? So I think that kind of clicking into what Christine said around that prioritization process, we really want to look at, is this a tool to generate pipeline? Is this a tool to drive productivity and the effectiveness of the team that's going to help improve those win rates? And is it happening? Is it being adopted? And is it being used in the way that we intended it to be used? So those are some of the things that we look at to really measure the effectiveness of the tool and, if we need to continue to use it.
Those are all really good takeaways and really like important framing in them too, since so many tools are intended to be leveraged one way, and then you find a different department that's, well, we're finding a lot of success using it this way.
Yeah.
Awesome. Brad, you look like you're ready to chime in.
Yeah, well, no, it was super interesting, and Christine and I have talked about this before on a couple different mediums and forums, but I have to reiterate with her, it is hard to let technology go. People don't want to. You form such a great relationship with your support team, with your customer success team from that product, and over time, especially even if it's just a year's worth of using a product, that system is tightly ingrained into your processes and into your other systems. So I think everybody kind of has that, that sweaty palm syndrome of, if I uninstall this managed package, or if I delete this integration, what dashboard's going to break, or what metric is my CRO not going to have? And that is a tough thing to quantify. It's a tough thing to understand a lot. We have these conversations with our customers all day long. But also to piggyback off of Haley's comments too, when you're thinking about technology, we actually presented on this at OpStars last year. We had a whole ROI around tech stacks, and it becomes, there's really three adjectives that you have to start understanding really deeply to start making these decisions: save, generate, and reduce. If you can, and it doesn't necessarily have to all be the same value prop or noun that you're trying to use those adjectives with. You have hours, you have ASP or ACV, and you have expenses. And if you can save, generate, and reduce any of those things, tying those adjectives with those nouns, it sounds weird. I know this is not an English class, but you have to think about how you go and articulate this. One of the things that we talk about with RevOps leaders all the time is, and Christine mentioned this, there's new technology coming out every day. We want to stay abreast of it. We want to stay in the know. If there's something that can help our business succeed, yeah, sign me up. But at the same time, we don't get to arbitrarily take that product or take that piece of software to our CFO and say, knock, 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 Miss CFO, I need to buy this software. It's going to make my life better. That's not a save, generate, or reduce. You have to be very detailed in how you pitch that.
Totally. And the ROI, like to that piece, like as RevOps leaders, like we are in charge of like some fundamental technologies like quote to cash, like sales enablement, like incentive comp. And all those are like can be difficult to stand up and a significant investment. So you absolutely have to make sure that you're hitting all those marks.
Totally.
Yeah. Jeff, do you want to cap us off on this one? How do you evaluate?
Yeah, I think what Brad, Haley, and Christine said are all true and accurate and important. Maybe I'll tie it up by saying that I've become a really big fan of frameworks later in my career. And by using a framework, you're consistently evaluating things against common criteria, whether you're looking to get rid of something, continue the use, or buy something new. And you're creating visibility to that too. So you don't get into the place where a director of sales is so insistent that we must buy this one thing that him and only his team or her team think is going to generate a ton of value. At Intercom, I learned one that they used in the product team there, and it was an excellent product team. It's called RICE. The R is for reach. Is this something that everybody in sales is going to be able to use and leverage, or is it something that only, say, the solution engineering team is? Doesn't mean one is more important than the other, but look at who's actually going to use it. The I is for impact, and Haley mentioned ROI, and so did Brad. What are we trying to drive in terms of change? What metrics are we trying to improve? What efficiencies are we trying to reduce? Understand that impact, and if you don't do that, you'll have no idea of whether the use of that solution is valuable. It gives you something to measure against and something to build a business case against, especially if there's no budget, so you have to go get a budget every time you want to buy something. The C is confidence. And Haley, I think this goes into adoption. Like, can we implement it? Some things are harder, some are easier, but even if we implement it, I mean, I've looked at LinkedIn Sales Navigator at times, and 20% of the reps are even using it enough to justify what we're paying. So understanding whether you're going to hit that adoption curve and actually get the value or not, even if the promise of using that is important. And the E is the effort. how much effort is it not only to replace something or implement something new, but also maintain the thing? And those are, I think, key considerations that you have to make, because the ROI has to include the cost. If it's a half person on your RevOps team that has to manage this, that costs you something, and that eats into your ROI. So using some sort of framework, the one that I described, or creating and coming up with one of your own, creates that consistency of how you evaluate things at standardization. And it kind of makes it more data driven and less objective, which I think makes it easier to make these decisions as you go forward.
I love that.
Yeah, totally. One thing, Jeff, you mentioned and I'll piggyback off you and Christine, 'cause I think y'all both mentioned this, and I find this fascinating. And these are conversations we get to have all the time when teams own specific technology. And that word owner is one word, two syllables, but man, that could confuse the heck out of a lot of people, because sure, marketing, my best guess is probably owns Marketo, HubSpot, insert name here, right? Or at least they are the power user and the power stakeholder. But man, the ownership side of it's so tricky these days, because there is a movement going right now, and I'm sure y'all are feeling this and starting to sense this too, with the heightened sense of security, data leakages, data governance. I can acronym soup you with CCPA and GDPR and all the other fun ones. We're seeing a lot of these shifts from departmental ownership to IT ownership. There's also that kind of breaking line in the sand. Some people will say 500, some people will say 1,000 person companies. It's going to go to IT anyway. But it's such an interesting, I almost call it risk point, because when that ownership starts to shift, and I'll pause by saying this is why I think RevOps should own systems, or at least have that seat at the table to have some type of ownership. Because when it's not owned by a centralized group like RevOps, who supports all go-to-market functions, how the heck am I supposed to know if the marketing team's using Zoom while I'm using Google Meets over in customer success? Two kind of competing products. We can all jump on a video call and do the same thing together, but our business is burning cash on both departments right now trying to support the exact same initiative. And if we don't have some sort of let's say collaborative group that owns it, but some sort of buying committee, steering committee, I can throw a bunch more jargon at you, but ultimately a whole business needs to know about the technology at their disposal. So often you see some of the highest churn results for businesses that don't know that. Like, man, I can't believe we got rid of this one vendor. Like, we had 2 CSMs using it and 50 AEs using it. Now those 2 CSMs are kind of out in the cold because they built that into their business process. So I know we've always said break down silos. That's a kind of overused term now, I think, at this point. But man, break down the ownership of technology, because if you don't have a clear sense at all the things at your disposal, man, you're just not going to be efficient. And that's just as much strain on that vendor as it is the company too, because they don't know how to support you either.
Well, and yeah, you mentioned marketing automation platforms. I even think about like some of those sales automation platforms with Outreach, SalesLoft. That becomes such a combined effort. You almost have to have like a racy chart for some of your platforms of like, maybe RevOps is the admin, but we are dependent on marketing for content and so on. But that's a really great point. You have to be very clear on who's doing what. There's
Totally.
lots of piece. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right. It has to be a single owner. And I think what's the promise of RevOps if RevOps is not the owner of all go-to-market systems? And yes, there should be a steerco, have folks from finance and marketing and customer success or support if that isn't already under RevOps. I think that's important to align on what you have, how it can help and support everybody, the impact if you get rid of something or buy something. But I think that the owner of IT could be dangerous. If you rely on IT to implement CPQ, probably not going to be producing quotes and orders the way that you think you should be producing quotes and orders. So I think ownership also has to deal with who's the benefit and who has to deliver the result of that, because technology is an enabling factor at the end of the day for you to hit your goals. And if it's not owned by someone who's also aligned to those goals and understands the strategies and the tactics of how to get there, you're probably not going to implement or use it correctly.
You just had to trigger me with CPQ comments. On that note, Jeff, we'll keep you in the hot seat because you did that. And we were on a CPQ project together and then have continued to collaborate on and brainstorm on CPQ projects at future companies. Do you have a case or a story that you can share about maybe a time that you have consolidated a tool or added a tool that increased performance and efficiency?
Yeah, I think this is probably something similar or similar experience most people have had. When you walk into a new company in a new role, it's an opportunity to do so. When I went into, say, Intercom, for example, we didn't even know what we had. Like, so the first thing I had to do was understand what we were even buying. I had to go look at invoices and understand where it was. So once you pull all that together, you can start applying that framework to start consolidating. And a big part of what I did initially was look at usage. I talked about LinkedIn Navigator. I put together, here's the expectation if you're going to pay for a license of how much we expect you to use it. And I got agreement from, sales leadership, and we communicated it. And if in 60 days you weren't using it at that level, you lost your license. So it's not just about removing things that aren't being used or don't align to what you're accomplishing now. You should certainly go through and do that. But it's also reducing licenses. And I also made sure that any new purchases went through me. I had that agreement from both legal and finance and my CRO that nothing could be bought on someone's credit card or no one else can sign an agreement, so that we could put it through that framework. And it wasn't, a way to say no. It was just a way to properly evaluate things. And then I also started doing the trade-off thing. You want this new thing, share with me something that you don't think is as valuable anymore. And let's see if we can make it cost neutral in some sense.
Yeah.
So I think once you start bringing in that structure and evaluating against a framework, looking at usage and usage pattern against defined expectations, you can start making some pretty quick decisions of what to cut.
Yeah. Haley, how about you?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that has really helped with the consolidation or even, adding of tools is getting a really deep understanding for the core vendors that you're working with and what their roadmap looks like over the next couple of years. Because I think that you can get in this position where if you're looking at what the current tech landscape looks like at a snapshot in time, then you're constantly having to, it's just like a moving target, right? And so I think that if you can start to get the business thinking about 1, 2, 3, maybe even 5 years down the road and where your business goals are aligned to what the tech stack landscape is going to look like at that point in time, you can begin to make trade-offs to say, hey, maybe we're going to consolidate these two vendors not having same functionality that we maybe have today, but we will in 1 year or we will in 2 years, and that will ultimately help us meet our goals for FY26 or FY27 or whatever that looks like. And then you can I think you can kind of go deeper with a vendor and even be part of their product roadmap conversations or their customer advisory boards and have more feedback on, where you can make investments from a product standpoint. And then, ultimately at the end of the day, I think one of the big benefits other than outside of cost savings of consolidating your tech stack is that you're really creating efficiencies across the team because you're making a more streamlined workflow. And so there's just benefit in doing that just for efficiency and productivity gains. So the more that you can understand what that roadmap looks like, for us a year ago, we actually had more tools than I would have wanted us to see, knowing that going into the next year, we were going to have a big consolidation based on where acquisitions were happening in the market and where product roadmaps were ending up landing. And so we kind of took maybe like a little bit of a step back to take a big leap forward going into the next fiscal year.
Well, and I think you touch on a really important theme within RevOps too, because it's so easy to get caught in the tactical, reactive world that can be RevOps, but keeping that mentality shift forward-looking and being proactive is so important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Just to give a high five and +1 to Haley on that. I think if you talk to anybody in a customer success fashion, or even executives who are just neurotically looking at GRR and NRR, every vendor under the sun should want to have that conversation with you. Oh, you want me to open up our roadmap document and tell you why we're thinking about building the things that we want to build for you, and you can help influence that? I think it's just one of the most underutilized things that success teams can do, but also just as a purchaser of software. We don't take advantage of that nearly as much. And also, to be fair, I get it. We are all juggling 30, 40, 50 plus pieces of software. So my calendar and your calendar the same would just look fully monopolized if we kept a weekly sync on or a monthly QBR. So it's a balancing act of finding that time. But man, if I could fight for the customer success teams of the world out there, like, please have that conversation with them. It doesn't have to be an hour-long thing. It can be 15 minutes, but they are there to support you and train you and help you get adopted by that piece. And it's just so, in my opinion, it can be so underappreciated at times. It's just such an easy conversation to have.
I think a lot of it has to do with the contractual element of it as well, right? Like Jeff said, I step in and I have to understand, they don't even know what they have, right? I mean, beyond that, it's like, when are our renewal dates and what are we contractually obliged to? And that oftentimes can drive a lot of when you have the consolidation type conversations. And if you're really ahead of the game and you are, let's say, working with a vendor on, a product that they're going to release in 6 months, a lot of times you can structure the contract in a way that really benefits you and the team financially for being one of the early adopters of their technology. But if you're constantly on your back foot and only talking about renewals 30, 60, 90 days ahead of it happening, you don't have an opportunity to get ahead of that consolidation or that kind of tech roadmap strategy.
Well, and I think it ties back to where developing a framework, like Jeff mentioned, for your organization is so key and so important, because to Brad's point, like, not any one of us on this call could meet with all the vendors, but you have to be able to trust your team to do that on your behalf and trust that everybody's rowing in the same direction and has the same understanding.
Absolutely.
I'm getting a lot of takeaways. Christine, do you have any examples you want to share?
Well, first, I am taking notes. If you see me, I never miss an opportunity to learn, even from my peers and from the teams, everyone. I think, well, I was working on like, I need a new bio. So I put in chat GPT, whatever, I think I said, love, hate tech stacks. And it spit out, relationship with tech stacks is complicated. Relationship status. I was like, I will not put that, but it is complicated. It is a lot to manage. I think I was telling you guys, like, we don't build tech stacks, we inherit them, and then we build them, and then we rebuild them, and we rebuild them, because the needs are changing, the landscape is changing, the size of our organization is changing. But what Haley said that stuck with me was that if we frame the conversation from a value add and more of a strategic point, we change our brand from being tactical to being strategic, right? We're not just saying we need this because it sends emails and it has AI and blah, blah. We say we think we can drive more pipeline and reduce spend on SDRs and make them more efficient and do this thing. And it supports our GTM of this type of growth. So I really like changing the framework, or not the framework, changing the way we frame the conversation with our executives and with people we need buy-off from. And I think that elevates our position.
Totally.
I think that's a great point, Christine. I think it's also, we get requests all the time, right, of people wanting to buy stuff. I think it's reframing with them as well. I set up intake forms for when people want to request something. You have to start with asking them, what business problem and business metrics are you solving? I just don't want to hear them say, I need to reduce 5 clicks. Not that isn't going to drive some efficiency, but I want them to tell me, how this is going to get them closer to their number, increase their win rate, retain more customers. Help me understand from their perspective why they think this is going to help them, and let them make that argument. If they can't, then it's almost like an automatic, sorry, until you can, we're not going to consider this. So I think it goes both ways.
I oftentimes like to ask if they can hit X metric without it. Like, yes, to really push them to think the inverse. It's like, are you not going to be able to generate enough pipeline if you don't have this? Like, and tell me why. Because it really pushes you to think, like, how would you do it without it? And how painful or not would that be? And it kind of like reframes the way that people think about it a lot.
Yeah, sometimes it pokes holes in like, oh, do we just not have an existing process around this?
Exactly.
So you want to put it as a Band-Aid.
Yeah. I had one of the coolest conversations with one of our customers the other day, and she was like, we don't use this term nearly enough as we should. We learned about it, man, way there back in like grade school or high school or maybe even college. Opportunity cost.
Mm-hmm.
We don't talk about it nearly enough, but she was saying like we were going through a renewal conversation. She's like, yeah, I've got to go and battle with my CFO right now because they're telling us to chop every piece of technology unless it's a defibrillator on the wall that's going to keep us alive. And I kind of laughed when she said that. And I was like, well, it's not going to keep you alive, but man, what is it that you're sacrificing by not being able to leverage it? Mm-hmm. And if you're comfortable with that sacrifice, cool. That makes total sense. But, you know, I don't have to tell this group or anybody watching what the last 18, 24 months of this funky market that we've been in has done to technology and retention rates and everything else. But I don't think we ask ourselves nearly enough at what is the opportunity cost if we don't use this piece of software. And I think it's that inverse of that ROI statement. Christina also like chuckled when you were talking about relationship status. I can't make this up. I spoke at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and the topic of it was Salesforce integrations, marriage counseling with Brad. We just talked about how it's tough to manage all these things, and it's truly a relationship. It's a technology relationship, but a relationship nonetheless.
Totally. And I think that kind of brings us to sort of the last topic on this note is like, as RevOps, I like to describe RevOps as a balance of people, process, and technology. So how do you balance all these pieces of tech with keeping the sales process simple and streamlined so that you're not getting in the way of ultimately what you're trying to drive your company to do? And Haley, I'd love to hear from you on that first, given your background and your role now.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're getting a little hello from Rue. Hi, Rue. I would say that one of the most important things is to really map out what your seller experience looks like. And I say that different from I make that very different than just the process, because I think it's really easy to write out like what are the different workflows that you have at various points of your sales cycle, but really getting what is the overall seller experience and how does your tech stack, because really like at the end of the day, the people that are using the tech stack aren't thinking about the tech stack or the landscape the same way that, you know, our RevOps team is thinking about it. They're just thinking about, I need to do my job. I need to go generate pipeline, or I need to go win a deal, or whatever that is. And what are all the steps that I have to take to do that?
What are all the fields I have to fill in?
Right, exactly. And so I think that if you really start with, and when I say start with, I mean like, your ops team should be in the field sitting side by side with people or doing it themselves. You have to look at exactly what that seller experience looks like and then work backwards from there. And you will instantly find holes and or duplicity, like replication of things that are not needed. And I think one of the biggest things that you'll find, and it goes back to this adoption point that I made earlier, is that oftentimes you have designed your process to work a certain way, but that's not how it's showing up in the seller experience and not how it's actually being used. And so I think that, you know, to your question of, you know, how do you balance, you know, maintaining simplicity in your sales process, but also making sure that you have, you know, all the tools that you need to, you know, achieve those business goals. I think you really have to anchor in the seller experience, which is not all that dissimilar from, you know, what we've, you know, talked about for many, you know, 10, 15, 20 years about the buyer experience. You know, you see like, you know, marketing and sales teams talk a lot about what's that end-to-end buyer experience. We should do the same thing internally for our customer facing teams, not just sales, but for the entire funnel. And I think when you do that, it will actually help you drive simplicity in your tech stack so that it's not that they're competing factors, but they're actually benefit one another.
Yeah. Love it. Yeah. I think transparency, talking to the reps. I spend time in the office with them. I want to be approachable. I actually encourage them to come to me with ideas, not really problems, but ideas, because they have things I'm not thinking about. And I love problem solving. I love thinking through things with them. And sometimes they just don't know it's possible to do something. It's just on their wish list forever of like, oh, I wish I had this. And if I allow them to have a place where they can talk to me, I do lunches with the like lunch and learns, and we just ask me anything. And we learn a lot from each other. So like rider alongs. I haven't done that in a while. Now it's on my list. Just added it. I think the transparency and being open to feedback, but firm on what we can and cannot do, I think that's also helpful.
You're describing the delicate balance as a RevOps leader.
I'd love to hear from you. No.
We have a new agent starting soon, and I can't wait to do ride-alongs with them. It's one of my favorite things to do. So anytime we have somebody new start, it's just ride-alongs all day long, and it's so much fun.
The joke was they were going to get me a shirt that said no. Yeah. I was like, I don't always say no. I start from no. I want you to get me to yes. I actually tell them that. I'm going to start from no, and I want to hear your thought process on selling me, pitching me this idea, this thing when it comes to tech. And if you can get me to yes, we're halfway there. So
I love using the rules of improv and saying like yes and explain to me. Jeff, how do you balance?
Yeah, my first job out of school, I worked for General Motors. I was a automotive engineer, and I worked on plant floors. And my group that I was in was a newly formed group, and our role was to go out and fix problems on the assembly line. And we found that the most insightful point of view of what was and wasn't working was actually going out on the assembly line and talking to the people doing the job. We'd sit in the office and people would come up with all these things that weren't working and why, and we go out to the floor and go, oh, no, that's not why. And then we'd understand what was broken, we'd fix it, and we'd build a better car. And I think, both Haley and Christine talking about shadowing reps, I think is the most important thing to do. Is what you think might be a good, elegant, efficient way of doing things might not actually be when you're having to do it multiple times a day, or you have 20 minutes to get a quote out before your champion is leaving the office. So you have to go get, and we call it profound knowledge, which I think a management consultant told us it was called at one point. But going out there to where the rubber hits the road is really, really, really important. But I think that driving the balance, I don't know that I'd use the word balance. I'd use the word again, the journey that your sales reps have to take, your SDRs have to take, and all of the handoffs. But also understanding part of the customer journey. If your strategy is to provide the best customer support, then you're going to look for a different set of tools than if it's just an okay thing. You're okay with an average CSAT or response time. But mapping out that customer journey, I agree with Haley, shows where the holes are, shows where the inefficiencies are. Combining that with spending time with them, you're going to find out what's being used, how it's being used, how it's consistently or not consistently being used. And it's going to really, really help your business case for doing certain things, revising processes and workflows, which you should always think about doing before you implement or re-implement something, and then understanding the value you can ultimately get from it. So all of those things I think are incredibly important on driving that balance. Don't give them something to use if it's going to make their life worse. And some of these things, the promise sounds great, but it actually is so difficult to use that no one's going to use it. Going back to the adoption thing, or if you force them to use it, it's actually making their workday more inefficient.
Totally. The one thing I'll add on this, I know we talked about it earlier, but I don't, if I had my crystal ball, I'd rub it right now. I think this is going to be one of the biggest challenges as a prediction of what we face in the future. Going back to talking about as it's 2024 and we go into more years and we're lacing AI into everything, and there's just going to be this increased scrutiny over security, over compliance, over everything else of how we use this software. And if that ownership shifts, that pendulum swings too far to the right or left, and ownership goes into IT, I'll be the first to raise my hand. I've never had an IT person do a ride along with me. Not to say they can't, not to say they won't, but if we're going to truly drive adoption the right way and truly find how to make a business better, I don't think it gets to sit under one ownership. I think, Jeff, going back to your point too, you've got to have those committees that are going to make sure that it's multi-threaded, that we've got multiple departments using these things. Because if we let it go too far, that pendulum swing too far one way or the other, adoption's going to suffer. And at that point, we're all in the tech space together, right? We all look at the
same. A big question
that
you can ask them though is like, is IT gonna be on the hook for sales productivity? Like, no. So you don't get to own the tool, right? Like if you're purchasing a tool and you're going to make an investment to drive a specific outcome, say sales productivity, then the person who owns that has to be responsible for driving that business outcome, like literally down to probably how they're compensated, right? Yes. And so I think that I think in absence of having a tool connected to a specific outcome that you're looking to drive, that's when it becomes really easy to shift the ownership over to a non-go-to-market function. But when it is tied to a particular outcome that you're looking to drive, it's very easy to say, IT, you don't own sales product. Or you want to be on the hook for a 5-point uplift in sales productivity? If not, then we're still owning it because that's the outcome that we're looking to drive. So I think that conversation can really help ensure that the pendulum doesn't swing too far the other way.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, having that transparency and candor is important too in supporting a go-to-market organization.
Yeah. Well, there's a massive difference between adoption and enrollment.
Yeah.
We've felt adoption before. I'm sure we're all working on computers that are SOC 2 compliant, and we've got to take that lovely click-through video once a year. You can force adoption. IT will force adoption on you. Yeah. Enrollment is a lot different. Like actually enabling and enrolling somebody in your way of thinking, in your process, and the way that you should be optimizing for. Man, there's so much more subjectivity there, which we all thrive in, but it is not as adoptable, if you will, from an IT perspective. No, watch the video, click the buttons, take the test.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think across all these segments that we've seen so much consolidation, like within vendors and overlapping features, that's going to be really interesting to see how that unfolds and kind of ties into some of these frameworks we talked about today too.
The question is it actually going to be cheaper? Mm-hmm. And just because they're, buying other companies, it doesn't mean they're working well together. So is the effort to implement it, to manage it, to get adoption actually going to be easier as well? I hope these companies are thinking about doing that, but it doesn't necessarily mean better.
Mm-hmm. Totally. I know, like Christine, I've got a lot of takeaways and things that I'm going to go set out after this. But yeah, I think that's a great point. And opportunity cost will forever be top of mind once more. Yeah. Thank you all for this conversation. This is great.
Thank you, Bailey. Thanks,
Bailey. Thank you, Bailey.
Next time, desserts.
Next
time. Bring samples.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.